especially for pivoting, if you're like thinking, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I can do that, it's so hard to then really hone in on selling yourself effectively when you're trying to sell yourself for a multitude of different roles. I love
I
that.
wonder if what other examples or other kind of career pivots that you have seen or worked with that, as a listener, you might not even imagine that to be a possibility.
But we really want to be able to leverage our past experience to help us in our new experience, even if it's not directly connected or even if it's a slightly different type of work that you were doing previously.
All right, welcome back to this episode of the How to Get a Job podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about job pivoting, but not just job pivoting. It's about how you're going to be able to pivot without having to start over. If you're switching from industry to industry, you might feel like you're going to have to start from the beginning to be able to get into this new industry, but that's not always true. In fact, if you work with a good coach, that's going to be rarely true. And to talk about this amazing topic, I have Eliana Goldstein. She's the founder of Eliana Goldstein Coaching. Eliana, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am super excited to talk to you, to record this podcast. I know we have a lot of mutual friends. In fact, I'm actually seeing our friend Diana tomorrow in Miami.
Ooh, nice. Give her a hug for me.
I saw you guys had an amazing time in Mexico, so that was
So good.
awesome.
It was amazing.
But welcome. Excited to talk about this topic because I know that you help a lot of millennials, and I am a millennial, and I've seen this over and over with my group of friends because I am the career guy in our friend group, and they're always asking me for this advice, and I was like, hey, I work with college students, like I don't want to give you the wrong advice, and so I'm super excited because now I can forward them this podcast and be able to be like, here it is, because I see a lot of people, including myself as a millennial and my friends, that end up making a career pivot. And I think maybe it's because they chose the wrong major when they were in college, maybe because they thought that's what their parents wanted to do, maybe so the pressures of society for whatever reason. But most people end up doing career pivots anyways. So I want to talk about that and say, when we were talking before we hit record, you talked about making career pivots without having to start over. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, traditionally people think that if I'm changing careers, whatever it might be, I'm going to have to start from the bottom, right? I'm going to have to work my way back up, learn all the new skill sets, both from like a title perspective and from a monetary perspective. And, I get the thinking behind that and I get the rationality behind it. But when you think about it, especially as we're targeting millennials and people who are, already a number of years into their career, to think that like we're going to throw all of that away is really silly when you think about it, right? So it's all about how do I strategically position and leverage the skill sets that I have to be able to help me like parlay that into the next career. And sure, sometimes there'll still be some upskilling opportunities and some gaps that you need to fill, but we really want to be able to leverage our past experience to help us in our new experience, even if it's not directly connected or even if it's a slightly different type of work that you were doing previously.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. It reminds me a lot of a fellow career coach friend who helps people break into medical sales. And in fact, it was super weird when he told me that his number one clients are actually nurses. Nurses
Mm,
and teachers. And I understood nurses, right? Like, medical sales, you probably interact with a lot of, like when you're a
yeah,
nurse, you interact with a lot of medical salespeople. But what really caught me by surprise was teachers. That is a
yeah,
massive change from, hey, I am the teacher at a high school or middle school or elementary school, and I'm now going and selling to doctors.
yeah.
Uh,
That
what
is really
other?
interesting.
So and I'll explain. I'll share with you what he told me because this is what he came to the conclusion. Like, he's been in medical sales for over 15 years. He said to be a good medical sales rep, you need two main things. You need to understand the science, and you need to be able to get at teaching that new science
Mm,
technology to the doctors, which is why nurses and teachers make the best pivots, because
makes
nurses know the
sense.
science, and then we can help them how to teach. Teachers know how to teach. We can teach them the science.
Yes, yes. That's a great point. I love
I
that.
wonder what other examples or other kind of career pivots that you have seen or work with that, as a listener, you might not even imagine that to be a possibility.
It's a great question. Yeah, and we were talking about this before. I've really worked with people across all industries. I've worked with a lot of teachers as well. And it's funny because I was going to say, I actually have seen teachers end up in a lot of sales roles, not
Mhm.
necessarily medical sales, but just like various like customer success or where there's like upselling opportunities or sales roles in general. And I think with teachers especially, who almost always undermine themselves and lack that confidence and think, oh, my skill sets aren't transferable. I would argue that teachers do more than anybody in their career, right? Like there's the lesson planning, the curriculum development, there's the interpersonal skills, both with students and then with administration and faculty. There's the interpersonal relationships with parents and being able to manage expectations and selling through new ideas in terms of curriculum development and all those things. So they're wearing so many different hats and like more so than people traditionally do. So it makes a lot of sense for them and they can generally like do these really big pivots. They just think that they can't. So I've definitely seen a lot of that. I've also seen people like I've worked with people in really different backgrounds, like people who like work in theater and are pivoting into, PR type fields because they're actually really good writers and they can leverage their writing skills in PR, right? And I've worked with people in who are more traditionally like who work in events but are really good at selling events and they move into like SaaS sales because they can leverage their selling skills in other fields, right? So it really is. I mean, I know we all hear the word transferable skills all the time, and it's like, transferable skills, but it really is important. And that becomes the focal point to being able to kind of both figure out the pivot and know how to position and sell yourself.
So I love all this. So let's say like, I am looking to pivot, but is there a process of how I should be thinking about it? Because I would assume, right? Like I think through this, if I am trying to get promoted within the same industry or maybe even
Yeah.
that, I can go and get a job within 3 to 6 months and it'll be a lot
Yeah.
easier because the transferable skills are all there, right? If
Yeah.
but if I'm trying to make a career pivot, I can see that taking a little bit longer. And maybe I'm a lot of imposter syndrome and a lot of hesitation. Where do you suggest starting?
So and you're right? Like obviously the job market right now is more challenging. Timelines can sometimes be a little bit longer and it can be a little bit longer when you are pivoting and you have to like advocate and make that case for yourself a little bit more. Where I always really focus on starting though is in the clarity phase, especially for pivoters. Even whether you have no idea what you want to do or whether you do have an idea of what you want to do, I think we would both agree that really niching down and being very targeted is going to be very important no matter what. But especially for pivoting, if you're like thinking, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I can do that, it's so hard to then really hone in on selling yourself effectively when you're trying to sell yourself for a multitude of different roles,
Mhm.
right? So you really have to first focus on, okay, like what is it that I want to pursue? If I have no idea, then let's like at the baseline really understand, okay, what are the things from my past career that I want to bring forward, the skills that I want to keep using and that I want to keep leveraging? What are the things that I want to completely leave behind? And if you have a little bit of an idea, but you're not quite sure, it's really about like niching down further to get really clear on like, this is a specific title of role that I'm going to be targeting. How do I tailor my story, especially like my pivot story to that specific title so that I can go in really confidently being able to deliver like, hey, I know my background is more non-traditional, but here's why I actually am a really great fit. And here's what I've been able to do and how I've been able to perform, despite the fact that my background is a little bit different. So it's like before you start hitting the applications, which I'm sure we both are believers, like, it's not just about sending a bajillion applications out. Before you get into the more executionary aspects, you have to focus on the foundational pieces around clarity.
Do you think networking plays a bigger role or the same amount of role when you're making a career pivot versus maybe you are just trying to get a job?
I would definitely say, I mean, it always plays a big role, but it plays a much, much bigger role when you are pivoting. And I tell my clients all the time, like, imagine you're a hiring manager or recruiter and you have two resumes in front of you. One is a totally traditional candidate, like kind of spot on experience for the role, and one is very non traditional. And you can kind of see how they're trying to tell a story of why their background could be a fit, but you know nothing about this person, about their cultural fit, their personality. All you can do is evaluate them based on a sheet of paper. Who are they going to pick? Of course, they're going to pick the safer and more traditional candidate. So those relationships and networking are going to be paramount when you are making any type of a pivot.
Yeah. I would assume like getting to the interview becomes harder, but it's in the interview that you actually have the opportunity to showcase a unique value proposition and how that weakness of you not having the traditional background can become an advantage. Have you seen it be
Exactly.
true or different? I would love to hear more about that.
Definitely, definitely. The hardest part is getting the interviews, and I mean, like, I would argue that's probably the harder part for most job seekers, but definitely for pivoters, right? Because you really have to be able to sell and make the case of like why they should be interviewing you in the first place, and that's going to require a lot of relationship building and informational meetings to kind of like get your cheerleaders who are going to go to bat for you. But then, yes, once you're in the interview, exactly like you said, and I just taught a master class, so I was just talking about this, that it's really about like, how do you take your weakness and spin it as your strength, right? Like, how do you take the fact that your background is in a different field? And for you, that's like the insecurity is like, oh my God, this is my non traditional experience. I did this. How do you take that and make it your unique selling point of like, this is actually why you should hire me for this
Yeah.
role? Like, that's the key.
I love that. I work with international STEM students, and I have this particular mentee who has a PhD in therapy, like physical therapy, and she then came to the United States, but she's studying software engineer, and she goes like,
Mm,
I don't have experience, and I'm like, I would be like, have you researched what are the best softwares for physical therapists? Because like the unique
yes,
experience that you have as being someone who would use that product will get, you know, and if not that specific, then go to healthcare or, you know, and then
right.
ortho and start like working your way back. And I love that we're so seeing a line that let me ask you, uh,
Yeah.
Rihanna, what do you think are the like, you know, one to top three biggest mistakes that career pivoters make that probably waste them a lot of time because they don't realize that soon enough?
Yeah. So I've literally like I'm repeating the masterclass. I love this. It's so tall, top of mind for me. So three biggest mistakes. We kind of touched on one of them already, and this is around the fact that a lot of the times people don't focus on the clarity piece, right? I'm like a big believer that to move forward, you have to like go through a process of self auditing and really like leveraging the data points from your past experience to be able to inform how you move forward. And I think people either like don't do that entirely or they just skim it over and they make assumptions like, oh well, like I'm passionate about this thing, so maybe I should pivot into this industry, right? Like it's very like uninformed decisions, and they make these assumptions and then they just make the pivot, and 2 years later they're unhappy again, right? Because like they're not using the data to inform their decisions. I think another really big mistake is kind of on this notion of yes, in a lot of ways, and for particular roles and fields, you might need to upskill. But a lot of the times, people make assumptions about what they need, and like the amount of people who come to me and are like, "I want to do this. Should I go get my master's? Or I want to do this, and should I get an MBA? Or should I do this certification?" Just based on like the fact that their parents told them that they think that they should, or because like they read it in a random article, and then like they can go and spend like so much money, so much time and effort on getting these certifications or degrees that aren't even helping them, right? So like everything you do needs to be rooted in market research, and you need to make sure that like you're talking to the people in the fields who are like, yes, you do need that degree, or no, you don't need that degree, right? So never assume. And then the final one is, and we were touching on this before, is that like relying on traditional methods to make a non-traditional pivot, right? Like if you're a non-traditional candidate, you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to apply for 100 jobs online, I'm going to get an interview, and I'm going to get a role, right? You have to think about like, how do I get my way in the back door to get in front of people so that I can then tell my story? So we can't be relying on like those kind of typical strategies.
Your second point on like upskilling, like we assume that I see that a lot with international students, just because I think it's the culture of like most of my
Yeah.
clients are from Asia and they value education a lot more. And I see the challenge that they get is that they continue to think that the reason why they haven't get into jobs because they need a master's or a PhD. And then the problem that I've seen them get is that they're now then over experienced for a level entry role,
Yeah.
right? Then under experience for, you know, a software engineer three as an example. And so
Yeah.
you get into this awkward stage where you depending on the hiring manager, you're under experienced or over experienced, and
Yeah.
because you have all this education, all these certifications, and in fact, like you didn't need all of that in the first place, because a lot of companies are valuing real world experience more than the
Exactly.
education. And so like to your point, like it's before just jumping into I'm gonna go get this certification or learn this thing, like getting it directly from the source, from the people who are currently doing that job, networking with people, and if you talk to 5 people and all 5 say you need that, then odds are you
Yeah.
do need that, but
Right.
not just jumping into conclusion because someone that is not in the industry, like your parents or a friend who is not involved into it, just says, oh, I think it would be good. The reason why you're not
Yeah.
getting it, the armchair
Exactly.
experts.
Exactly. And I'm also such a believer too that like in this day and age, if there are, sometimes it's like it might be like a lack of familiarity, like with certain like lingo that you need to be using during the interview process or when you're networking with people, right? It might not be like you need to go get a master's degree, but there might be like some little things that you need to work on. And like I'm a believer, like go to YouTube and learn about it, right? Listen to a podcast, read a book. You don't need to like spend tons and tons of money. You can familiarize yourself with something so you're a little bit more comfortable like speaking about it conversationally, to kind of help sell yourself a little bit rather than like, like pouring like literally tens upon tens of thousands of dollars into a master's program.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Is it ever too late to pivot?
No, I don't think so. I mean, like like I feel like it would fundamentally go against anything I believe in to say that's the case. Might it get harder as you get a little bit older and as you like can pigeon yourself a little bit more? Yeah, it might be a little bit more challenging. But I also believe that like even though I primarily work with millennials, I have had some cases where I've worked with people of older generations, like more like my parents, but generation and baby boomers. And what I find with those individuals is it's not even so much that they've pigeonholed themselves. Like, yes, that's a part of it, but it's more so their mindset. Like they just can't believe or can't like they want to change, but they're so like caught in their own ways and ways of thinking about things and like they can't see themselves doing it because they've been doing it for so long that like they don't fully believe it, so it's hard to sell someone else when they don't fully believe it,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's like it's just more so like the mindset that you get caught up in more so than like, oh, you've been doing this for longer so you absolutely can't pivot. Like I think if you believe it, you can always make it happen.
Is there such thing as like should you be targeting like startups, mid-level companies, or bigger companies? Is there like a way where like, hey, if you're pivoting, you're better off going for startups or small companies because they're more open-minded? Or am I just generalizing that I'm completely wrong? This is just a guess.
No, I think that it's like a great assumption. And I think like it could vary from industry to industry that for certain, like depending on a certain role you're in and a different one industry might be easier to target. Like I'm a really big believer with my clients too on like outside of just pivoting and not starting over, it's like building a career that you can actually be excited about, right? Like part of the reason you're pivoting is probably because you're unhappy where you are. So you're trying to pivot with the intention that like I'm going to be happier in this next phase of my career. So point being that like if you're someone that wouldn't thrive in a startup environment, I wouldn't recommend targeting a startup, even if it's easier to pivot, right? Because then you're still going to be unhappy. So I am, when I'm working with clients, like I'm really supporting them on, okay, like what is the ideal place that I want to be? Is it a larger company? Is it a startup? Is it more mid-size, right? Like what is the environment that's going to work for me and making it more aligned like with your values and your skill sets and where you thrive versus like, oh, what's the easiest thing for me to do?
Yeah, I guess like what I found, like if you have a more of a generalist mindset, you do better at startups because you're wearing multiple hats. But if
Yeah.
you think more of a specialist, I think corporations like to hire specialists because they're like, it's like I want to be in marketing. Well, what do you want to do in marketing? I want to do all of it. Then a
Yeah.
startup is better. But if like I want to be in charge of emails for one particular brand, you're
Yeah.
better off going to a corporation uh,
Yeah.
to do that.
I definitely don't disagree with that. I definitely think like it when you're going to a larger corporation, like being a subject matter expert is definitely going to be to your advantage. At the same time, again, I try not to discourage my clients that like if they are more of a generalist and they want to target a larger company, it doesn't mean that they can't, right? It just means that they need to then they're generalists, they wear different hats. Pick a lane that you want to focus on and like be able to market yourself better as a subject matter expert in that if you're going to target the larger company.
And there's different roles too that are more that like there's a lot of like account management or sales roles or client success roles where you have to know a little bit of a lot, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there are roles even within big corporations that are meant more for generalists too. So I guess that totally makes sense. Well,
Absolutely.
Ileana, as we wrap up, I would love for you to share a little bit more about, yourself and the programs that you provide. And if people that are listening to this are finding a lot of value and are considering making a pivot, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for asking. So, one of the signature ways that I support clients is I have like a core program called the Career Upgrade, and it really walks you through that full process of how do you change careers without starting over, touching on a lot of what we talked about today, like starting with like building the confident mindset, moving into the clarity piece, moving into the more like networking, relationship building, optimizing and marketing yourself piece, and then into like what I call the close phase of like interviewing effectively, selling yourself, and all those things. So, really walking you through that whole program. Um, it is a hybrid program where we combine both one on one coaching with group coaching. I'm a very big believer that both are important and
Yeah.
fundamental to be successful. And so, if you're wanting to learn more about it, I'm more than happy to share with you. Best place to connect with me is either like on Instagram or LinkedIn. And same thing on both. On Instagram, I'm Eliana_Goldstein. On LinkedIn, I'm Eliana Goldstein, keeping it super simple. So always feel free to reach out there, and I'd be happy to chat and ultimately see if we can support you.
Love it. Well, we will definitely put all your, Instagram, LinkedIn, and your website all in the show notes for all the
Perfect.
listeners. And if you're listening to this, if you find value in this, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you know anybody that has maybe talked to you about they're thinking about making a career pivot or not, don't hesitate to share this episode with them. That would be super valuable for them to be able to at least know where to start. So thank you all so much for listening, and catch you guys all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.